An anonymous millionaire takes a homeless mother and child into his home on Christmas Eve. A few days later, he has to renovate the house because the air inside the small, dimly lit kitchen smelled faintly of pine and cinnamon, a rare luxury Cynthia had splurged on to create some semblance of Christmas for her son. The tree, if it could be called that, stood in the corner, a sparse bundle of branches she had picked up at a discount from the lot closing down for the night. She hummed softly as she wrapped a second-hand puzzle set for Justin, her fingers moving deftly despite the gnawing worry in her chest. The money was gone. Every cent she could scrape together had been spent. Dylan's gambling stash, concealed in the shoebox on the closet shelf, had been her final resort. She had wrestled with the decision for days, knowing full well the storm it would bring. However, the image of Justin's wide, hopeful eyes as he talked about Santa had swayed her decision. A few cheap toys, a box of cookies, and a modest dinner. Surely that wasn't too much to ask for Christmas. The door slammed open, shattering the fragile peace. "Sin, where's my money?" Dylan's voice was already slurred, his words sliding together. He leaned against the doorframe of the living room, his eyes narrowing as he took in the half-decorated tree and the small pile of wrapped presents underneath. Cynthia stepped away from the counter. I used some of it for Justin," she said softly. "Just a little. For Christmas." His expression darkened. "You what?" He stepped closer, his body looming over hers. "That money was for my hand. You know that." Her fingers gripped the hem of her sweater. "It's Christmas, Dylan. He doesn't understand why he doesn't get—" He grabbed her wrist, his grip tightening painfully. "You don't take from me," he hissed. The heat of his breath smelled of stale liquor, and his face flushed with rage. "I don't care if it's for the kid or for you. That money isn't yours." "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. It was just enough for a few things. He doesn't have anything else. The train set, caught Dylan's eye, its red bow mocking him. He released her wrist and picked it up, turning it over in his hands with an almost lazy cruelty. "This?" He laughed, cold and sharp. "This is what you thought was worth taking from me." "Dylan, don't—" she began, but it was too late. He hurled the train across the room. It crashed against the wall and splintered into pieces. The sound made Justin cry from his bedroom, the boy's frightened wails slicing through the tense air. "Dylan!" Cynthia shouted, moving toward the broken toy instinctively, but he stepped in front of her, blocking the way. His finger jabbed toward her chest. "You ungrateful bitch," he spat. "You think you can just take from me and play happy family? You don't get to decide how this house runs. Not you, not that kid." Justin's cries grew louder. Cynthia pushed past Dylan, scooping the boy up from his bed. She held him tightly, whispering soft reassurances as he buried his face in her shoulder. "Get out," Dylan said suddenly. The words were cold, final. "Both of you, out." Her knees buckled, the weight of the command hitting her harder than his insults ever had. "Dylan, it's freezing outside. Please, he's just a child." "I said, get out," he roared, grabbing the suitcase she kept in the closet and throwing it toward her. "I don't care where you go. Not my problem." She held Justin tighter, her voice breaking. "Please, at least let me—" He grabbed her coat from the hook by the door and flung it at her. "Leave." The door slammed behind her, the sound like the snap of a guillotine. Snow swirled in the wind as Cynthia stood on the porch, Justin trembling against her chest. She clutched him closer, her own breath fogging the icy air. The streets of Leavenworth were alive with Christmas magic. Laughter from open windows, warm light spilling from shops, and the faint smell of roasted chestnuts. But none of it reached Cynthia as she trudged down the snowy lane, the weight of her son heavy in her arms. Her boots left uneven prints behind her fragile and fleeting against the relentless cold. She didn't know where to go. "Where are we going, Mama?" Justin's voice wavered, his mittened hand clutching hers. Cynthia tightened her grip and pressed a kiss to his forehead. "Somewhere safe," she said, though she had no idea where that might be. The snow crunched beneath their feet as they wandered aimlessly through the quiet streets. Cynthia's breath came in ragged bursts, her mind racing for answers. She caught a glimpse of the glowing church at the end of the street, its tall, stained-glass windows illuminated from within. The faint strains of a choir reached her ears, soft and inviting. Clutching Justin close, Cynthia made her way toward the church, her heart heavy but resolute. The snow deepened under Cynthia's boots as she trudged toward the glow ahead, her breath coming in short, visible bursts. Justin had stopped whimpering, his small body slack against her shoulder as exhaustion overtook him. The faint sound of singing drifted through the crisp night air, the harmony of voices carrying words she couldn't quite make out but felt in her chest, soft, steady, comforting. She paused at the church's steps, the weathered wood creaking beneath her weight. Through the stained glass windows, the flickering light of candles played on the snow. The warmth beyond the heavy doors seemed impossible compared to the biting cold that numbed her hands and feet. Justin stirred. "Mum." His voice was faint, barely audible over the wind. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered, pressing her lips to his cold forehead. "We're just going to get warm for a bit." She pushed open the door, and the quiet hum of the choir filled her ears. The warmth hit her first, a sharp contrast to the night. Her eyes adjusted to the soft glow of the sanctuary. Candles lined the walls, their light reflecting off polished wooden pews and illuminating the figures of people gathered in clusters, heads bowed, voices rising in unity. The priest was the first to notice her. He was tall, his thin frame wrapped in a simple robe, his hands folded before him. His brow furrowed slightly as he stepped toward her, but his expression softened as his gaze fell to Justin. "Good evening," he said, his voice low and kind, carrying the calm authority of someone used to comforting the lost. "Come in, please. You must be freezing." Cynthia faltered, clutching Justin tighter. Her throat felt tight, her words trapped. She wasn't sure how to explain why they were there. "It's all right," the priest assured her, gesturing to a pew near the back of the church. "Take a moment to sit. You're safe here." Safe. The word felt foreign, almost unreal. Still, she moved forward, her legs stiff from the cold. She lowered Justin onto the bench first, wrapping the coat more snugly around him before sitting beside him. He curled against her, his small fingers clutching her sleeve. The priest returned with a thick woolen blanket and draped it over them. "There's soup in the kitchen," he said gently. "I'll bring you some." Before Cynthia could protest, he was gone, leaving her surrounded by the gentle murmur of the congregation and the faint scent of evergreen garlands draped over the pews. Justin stirred again, his eyes fluttering open. "Is it Christmas yet?" he asked, his voice muffled. "Almost," Cynthia replied, brushing a strand of hair from his damp forehead. Her own voice wavered, the words catching in her throat. "Just rest for now." The soup came moments later, steaming in a ceramic bowl, along with a hunk of bread. Justin perked up at the smell, sitting up enough to take the bowl into his small hands. Cynthia's fingers tingled as she warmed them against the cup of tea the priest offered her. "Thank you," she murmured, meeting his kind eyes. He only nodded before stepping away to tend to another parishioner. As Justin ate, she noticed a man watching them from the far side of the sanctuary. He stood apart from the congregation, his hands tucked into the pockets of a dark wool coat, his shoulders slightly hunched. His gaze wasn't unkind, but there was a quiet intensity to it. He seemed like someone used to being on the periphery. The coat he wore seemed simple, but Cynthia noticed that it was an expensive material, inappropriate for such a place. After a moment, he approached. His footsteps were soft, deliberate, as if not wanting to disturb. "Hi," he said, his voice low but steady. "I couldn't help noticing. You look like you could use a place to stay." Cynthia blinked at him, unsure how to respond. His features were sharp, but not harsh. His dark hair flecked with snow, and his eyes carried a weariness that mirrored her own. "I have a cabin," he continued, sensing her hesitation. "It's nothing fancy, but it's warm. You're welcome to stay there tonight." He glanced at Justin, then back at her. "It's better than this. Why?" The question slipped out before she could stop herself. Her voice wasn't accusatory, just cautious. She had learned not to trust kindness too easily. The man shifted, his jaw tightening slightly. "Because we should have to spend Christmas at home," he said simply, "especially a kid." She studied him for a moment longer, searching for any sign of ulterior motives. There was none, just quiet sincerity. "I thank you," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to repay—" "You don't have to," he interrupted gently. "Let's just get you both out of the cold." The priest handed Nathan a lantern for the walk back, murmuring something Cynthia didn't catch. She rose, wrapping Justin in the blanket and carrying him as they stepped into the night. The wind had softened, and the snow fell more lightly now, coating the ground in a glittering blanket. As they left the glow of the church behind, Nathan walked a step ahead, his silhouette framed by the lantern's light. Cynthia followed, her breath visible in the night air. The weight on her chest felt a little lighter. The snow crunched underfoot as they moved deeper into the silent outskirts of Leavenworth. The glow from Nathan's lantern cast soft shadows on the snowbanks, illuminating the path ahead. Cynthia's arms ached from carrying Justin, but she didn't dare let go. Each step away from the church and into the dark wilderness made her question her decision. Nathan broke the silence. "I volunteer at the church during the holidays," he said, his voice low and even. "They're always short on hands this time of year. Figured I'd be more useful there than sitting at home." Cynthia glanced at him, his words unassuming, his tone steady. She noticed the way he kept his head slightly down, his shoulders hunched against the cold. It wasn't the posture of someone used to boasting or intruding. "Do you live far?" she asked hesitantly, her breath forming clouds in the freezing air. "Not much further," he replied, glancing back briefly. "The cabin's tucked away, but the path's safe. You'll see the smoke from the chimney soon." The mention of a chimney, a promise of warmth, helped ease her tension, though her grip on Justin remained firm. The boy stirred in her arms, his face half buried in her coat. "Mom," Justin mumbled, his voice thick with drowsiness. "Are we there?" "Almost," she whispered, kissing the top of his head. "Just a little longer, sweetheart." Nathan stopped suddenly, his lantern swaying as he adjusted his grip on it. "There," he said, pointing ahead. In the distance, Cynthia could see the faint orange glow of firelight flickering through a small window. The cabin emerged from the darkness like something out of a storybook. It was modest, with a pitched roof heavy with snow and a single stone chimney puffing wisps of smoke into the night sky. The porch sagged slightly under the weight of frost, and the wood looked weathered, but sturdy. Nathan moved ahead and unlocked the door, stepping inside first to light a lamp on the small table near the entrance. The warm glow revealed a space that was as simple as it was inviting. A wood-burning stove sat in one corner, its fire crackling softly. A couch with a knitted throw draped over it faced the stove, and a small kitchen area was tucked neatly to one side. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books, tools, and a few knickknacks that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. "Come in," Nathan said, stepping aside. "It's not much, but it's warm." Cynthia hesitated on the threshold, her eyes scanning the room. She didn't see any signs of extravagance or hidden danger, only the quiet, practical life of someone who lived simply. As she entered, the warmth enveloped her like a wave. "Here," Nathan said, motioning to the couch. "Sit down. I'll get the fire going a little stronger." Cynthia lowered Justin onto the couch, where he immediately curled into the throw. She sat beside him, rubbing her arms as her gaze wandered. A single photograph caught her attention. A small frame on the mantel above the stove. It showed a young woman with bright eyes and a soft smile, standing beside Nathan. Her hand rested lightly on his arm. Cynthia didn't ask. The photograph's edges were worn, and the glass had a faint crack running through it. It felt like the kind of memory one didn't speak about. Nathan knelt by the stove, adding another log to the fire. The flames leapt higher, casting his face in shadow and light. "I'll grab some blankets," he said, standing and moving to a chest near the far wall. He pulled out a couple of thick wool throws and handed one to Cynthia. "Thank you," she murmured, wrapping it around herself. Justin's eyes were half open now, taking in the cabin's warm glow. "Is this your house?" the boy asked, his voice still tinged with sleep. "Yep," Nathan replied, leaning against the kitchen counter. "Just me and the trees out here." Justin frowned. "Don't you get lonely?" Nathan smiled faintly. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but it's quiet, peaceful." Cynthia watched the exchange, noting how easily Justin seemed to accept Nathan's presence. It was as if the boy could sense something unthreatening about him, something safe. Nathan turned his attention to her, his expression softening. "You don't have to tell me anything," he said quietly. "But if you need to talk, I'll listen." For a moment, Cynthia said nothing. The words seemed stuck in her throat. But then she looked at Justin, his small hands clutching the blanket, and felt the weight of the night pressing down on her. "We had nowhere else to go," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Justin's father, he threw us out. I didn't know what to do." Nathan nodded once, his gaze steady. He didn't press for details or offer empty platitudes. "You're here now," he said simply. The quiet assurance in his tone made Cynthia's chest tighten. She looked around the cabin again, the worn furniture, the faint smell of pine, the gentle crackle of the fire. It wasn't much, but it felt more like home than anything she'd known in years. The fire crackled steadily, filling the silence that had settled in the cabin. Outside, the snowstorm whispered against the windows, its fury muted by the thick logs of the walls. Cynthia sat cross-legged on the couch, her fingers absently smoothing the edges of the blanket draped over her lap. Justin, finally asleep, was curled into her side, his steady breath syncing with the rhythm of the flickering flames. Nathan sat at the small kitchen table, nursing a mug of coffee. The lamplight played over his face, highlighting the lines of someone accustomed to solitude. For a while, they didn't speak. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but it carried a weight that neither seemed eager to disturb. Cynthia's gaze drifted to the photograph on the mantel again. The young woman's smile was bright, unrestrained, a contrast to the quiet sadness that seemed to hover around Nathan. She hesitated, unsure whether to ask, then decided against it. Instead, she stared into the fire, where the heat was beginning to thaw the cold that had seeped into her bones. "I used to love Christmas," she said quietly, breaking the silence. Her voice wavered, and she cleared her throat. "I mean, when I was younger. Before—" She trailed off, her fingers tightening on the blanket. Nathan didn't respond immediately, but she could feel his attention shift to her. He waited, giving her space to continue. "It wasn't always like this," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Dylan wasn't always like that. When we first met, he was different." She paused, her mind pulling her back to a time that felt like a lifetime ago. She could see him as he was then, charming, full of ambition, the kind of man who could make anyone feel like they were the center of the world. "We were young, and everything felt big," she said, her voice tinged with a faint, bitter nostalgia. "He had dreams, and I believed in them. In him." Nathan didn't speak, but the way he shifted slightly in his chair told her he was listening. "But dreams turn into something else when they don't work out," she continued, her words slower now, each one carrying weight. "And disappointment. It changes people." Her gaze dropped to her hands, her knuckles pale from clutching the blanket. "One day, the man you love isn't the same anymore. You tell yourself it's temporary, that he'll come back, that if you try hard enough, you can fix it. Fix him." She exhaled shakily, her eyes stinging. "But you can't. And then it's not just about love. It's control. Fear." The words hung in the air, their sharp edges cutting through the warmth of the room. Nathan, still silent, leaned forward slightly, his mug cradled in his hands. "Control," he said finally, his tone quiet but firm. "It leaves no room for anything else." Cynthia looked up, surprised by the note of understanding in his voice. He stared into the dark liquid in his mug, his jaw tightening. "In New York, I used to run a restaurant chain. It was everything to me. Long hours, endless stress. But it was mine. Ours." He stopped, his voice catching briefly. "My girlfriend Claire was part of it. She designed the space and picked every detail. It was her dream, as much as mine." His hand tightened around the mug, his knuckles whitening. "She died in a car accident 2 years after we opened. Coming back from the florist's, of all things. She'd wanted fresh flowers for the tables every day." The silence that followed was heavier than before. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and Justin's soft breathing. "I walked away from it all," Nathan continued, his voice lower now. "The restaurant, the city, money, everything. It felt hollow. The noise, the rush, it just reminded me of what wasn't there anymore." He glanced toward the photograph on the mantel, his gaze lingering. "So I came here, figured I'd trade the chaos for something quieter." Cynthia studied him, the lines of his face sharper in the firelight. "Does it help?" she asked softly. Nathan's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Most days, some days, not so much. They fell into silence again, but this time it felt different. Less like an absence and more like a truce. Two people holding their own pain close, but not shutting each other out. Cynthia shifted, her hand brushing Justin's hair. "You don't strike me as the church-going type," she said, her attempt at lightening the mood halting but sincere. Nathan huffed a quiet laugh. "I'm not, usually. But the church needs help. And I had something to do. Turns out stacking chairs and handing out blankets is decent therapy." Her lips twitched into a faint smile. "Therapy," she echoed, her voice almost teasing. Nathan glanced at her, his expression softening. "In my opinion, you made the correct decision," he stated. "Getting out, I mean." Cynthia looked down at Justin, her hand lingering on his shoulder. "I hope so," she whispered. The fire crackled again, filling the space between them, And though the shadows of their pasts lingered, for the first time in a long while, they didn't feel so alone. The days passed in a steady rhythm, each one a quiet testament to survival. The snow outside the cabin thickened, muffling the world into a serene, white stillness. Cynthia found herself falling into Nathan's routine, an unspoken agreement to help where she could. Mornings began early, with the crackle of the wood stove and the hiss of a kettle. Nathan would emerge from his room with his sleeves rolled up, his movements deliberate but unhurried. Cynthia would rise shortly after, careful not to wake Justin, who slept with his stuffed bear tucked under his arm. "Need a hand?" she asked one morning, standing by the stove where Nathan stirred a pot of oatmeal. He glanced at her, his expression neutral but not unfriendly. "Sure. Plates are in the cupboard." Cynthia busied herself, grateful for the task. The simplicity of setting the table grounded her, offering a reprieve from the restless thoughts that often crept in during the stillness. Justin woke to the smell of cinnamon and brown sugar, his small face lighting up when he saw the table set with steaming bowls. "Can I help?" he asked, his voice still thick with sleep. Nathan crouched beside him, ruffling his hair. "You can stir the oatmeal tomorrow, deal?" "Deal." Justin beamed, and Cynthia watched as her son's guarded demeanor began to melt in the warmth of the cabin. The bond between Justin and Nathan grew steadily, shaped by quiet moments of shared work. Nathan took the boy outside to chop wood one afternoon, handing him a smaller, blunt-edged tool to keep him safe. "Keep your hands here," Nathan instructed, guiding Justin's grip. "And watch where you swing." Justin's first few attempts were clumsy, but Nathan's patience never wavered. By the end of the day, the boy was proudly carrying small logs back to the cabin. Inside, Cynthia cleaned and organized, her gaze often drifting to the window where she could see Nathan's tall figure standing beside Justin, his steady presence reassuring. The sight stirred something unfamiliar in her, an echo of safety, of stability. It was over dinner one evening, as the snow continued to fall outside, that the idea first took root. "This place," Cynthia began hesitantly, her spoon tracing idle circles in her bowl of stew. "It's cozy, inviting." Nathan raised an eyebrow, but didn't interrupt. "I mean, it's more than that," she continued, her voice gaining momentum. "There's something about it. The way it feels. Like home." Nathan set his spoon down, leaning back slightly. "Go on." Cynthia glanced at Justin, who was absorbed in arranging the last of his bread into neat shapes on his plate. "Have you ever thought about turning it into something more? Like a restaurant? Or a small inn?" Nathan's brow furrowed, his expression unreadable. "A restaurant?" She nodded, feeling a flicker of embarrassment, but pressing on. "I know it sounds crazy, but you clearly know your way around a kitchen. And this cabin, it's charming. People would love a place like this, especially during winter." Nathan's silence stretched, but it wasn't dismissive. His gaze drifted toward the stove, then to the mantel where the photograph of Claire rested. "It was Claire's dream," he said finally, his voice quieter than usual. "The restaurant in New York. She wanted a space where people felt like they belonged." Cynthia hesitated, unsure if she'd pushed too far. "I'm sorry," she began, but Nathan shook his head. "No, it's a good idea," he said, his tone thoughtful. "This place has potential. It could work." The shift in his demeanor surprised her. There was a spark of something in his expression, hope, or maybe curiosity. "What would it look like?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. She was taken aback by the question, but she quickly recovered, her mind buzzing with possibilities. "Well, we'd keep it simple. Warm meals, a cozy atmosphere. Maybe a few rooms upstairs for people who need a place to stay overnight." Nathan nodded slowly, his gaze distant as if picturing it. And you'd run it? We'd run it, Cynthia corrected, her voice firm. If you're willing. With your skills and this space, I think we could make it happen. Justin, catching the excitement in her tone, piped up, "Can I help? I can serve drinks." Nathan chuckled, the sound low, but genuine. "We'll make you head waiter," he said, ruffling Justin's hair again. The conversation continued late into the evening, evolving from a tentative notion into a real plan. Nathan opened up more about his time in New York, sharing snippets of his experience managing a bustling kitchen. Cynthia, in turn, offered ideas for how to create a space that felt welcoming and warm. By the time the fire burned low, the cabin had transformed, not physically, but in spirit. The air buzzed with a shared sense of purpose, a feeling Cynthia hadn't realized she'd been missing. As she lay awake that night, Justin tucked beside her, Cynthia stared at the ceiling and allowed herself to hope. The future didn't feel like a looming shadow. It felt like a door, waiting to be opened. The first nail hammered into the wood seemed louder than it should have been, reverberating through the snowy silence outside the cabin. Cynthia stood back, holding a handful of new boards that the local hardware store owner, Mr. Wallace, had donated after hearing their plan. His only request had been to come by for a cup of coffee when the place opened. Nathan adjusted his grip on the hammer, squinting at the uneven plank in front of him. "We'll need to sand this down," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Justin was perched on the porch steps, watching intently, his cheeks flushed from the cold. "Can I try next?" Justin asked, his voice eager. Nathan glanced back, a small smirk tugging at his lips. "You want to hammer nails or supervise?" "Both," Justin replied with an exaggerated nod, drawing laughter from both adults. The cabin slowly began its transformation, each day marked by small but steady progress. Cynthia took charge of organizing the space, moving furniture and envisioning how each corner could contribute to the inviting atmosphere they hoped to create. She found an old ledger tucked away in one of Nathan's storage boxes and flipped through its empty pages. "This will do for keeping track of supplies," she said, showing it to Nathan over lunch. He nodded. "It's yours. You seem better at numbers than I am." Cynthia smiled, jotting down a rough inventory list, while Justin doodled a crooked version of their cabin on the opposite page. The work wasn't easy, but it carried a sense of purpose that filled the cold winter days. Kind locals began to trickle in, offering tools, advice, or just stopping by to see what Nathan and his unlikely partners were up to. Mrs. Cartwright from the bakery brought over a stack of fresh loaves one morning, smiling warmly as she handed them to Cynthia. "Every good inn needs good bread," she declared, brushing flour from her hands. By mid-afternoon, the smell of fresh bread filled the cabin. Justin, self-declared head of taste testing, sat at the kitchen counter, chewing happily on a slice, while Nathan experimented with a stew recipe. "What do you think?" Nathan asked, watching the boy closely. Justin chewed thoughtfully, then gave a decisive thumbs up. "Needs more carrots." Cynthia stifled a laugh as Nathan raised an eyebrow. "More carrots, huh? Noted." The renovation reflected more than just physical changes. It mirrored their own growth. Justin had found a sense of belonging, his laughter filling the space as he helped paint the walls or arrange small centerpieces for the tables Cynthia had salvaged. Nathan, who had previously been reserved and silently burdened, started to open up. There were moments, usually when he was focused on cooking, where he would hum a quiet tune or tell a story about his time in New York. Cynthia watched him with a mixture of admiration and curiosity, noticing how his hands moved with practiced ease as he kneaded dough or chopped vegetables. "You're a natural," she remarked one evening as he plated a trial dish for dinner. Nathan shrugged, a faint smile on his lips. "Spent years doing this. Muscle memory. Cynthia set down her notebook, where she'd been sketching out possible layouts for the dining area. Do you miss it? He paused, the smile fading slightly. Sometimes, he admitted. But this feels different. Better, maybe. Cynthia nodded, her gaze lingering on him for a moment longer before returning to her notes. As the cabin took shape, so did their shared vision. Nathan worked on a menu, testing recipes and tweaking flavors, while Cynthia managed logistics, ordering supplies, planning how to maximize the space, and drafting their first small advertisement for the local newspaper. Justin insisted on decorating. He brought in pine cones and painted them gold, stringing them into garlands to hang above the windows. It's fancy, he declared, stepping back to admire his work. Nathan chuckled. You possess a keen sense of style. Cynthia watched the two of them with a quiet smile. The sight of her son, carefree and grinning, filled her chest with an unfamiliar warmth. The name came to them one night as they sat around the fire, sipping mugs of hot chocolate. It needs to feel like home, Cynthia said, her voice thoughtful. Something warm, inviting. Like the hearth, Nathan suggested, nodding toward the stove where the flames danced. Cynthia tilted her head. Hearthstone. Justin perked up. Hearthstone, inn and tavern. Nathan leaned back in his chair, his expression contemplative but pleased. Hearthstone, inn and tavern it is. By the end of the month, the cabin was barely recognizable. The dining area glowed with soft light, the tables dressed with simple but elegant settings. We would love to know where you will be spending Christmas this year. At home, at church, or at a nice restaurant? Share your plans in the comments. I'm sure many people will have the same idea as you. The kitchen, once a humble corner of the cabin, had been expanded and outfitted with new equipment, a gift from a retired chef in town who had heard about their project. The sign, hand-painted by Justin, hung proudly above the porch. Cynthia traced the edges of the letters with her fingertips, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and disbelief. It's really happening, she murmured. Nathan stood beside her, his hands shoved into his coat pockets. Yeah, he said softly. It is. They exchanged a glance, and for a moment, the weight of their pasts seemed to lift, replaced by the quiet promise of something new. Inside, Justin's laughter rang out as he spun in circles, his joy a perfect reflection of the hope that now filled Hearthstone Inn and Tavern. Hearthstone Inn and Tavern opened quietly on a snow-dusted morning, the sun peeking shyly through the clouds. The warm glow of the firelight spilled through the cabin's windows, beckoning visitors inside. The first customers were neighbors, friends who had lent a hand during the renovations. They filled the tables, their laughter and chatter weaving into the hum of the kitchen. Cynthia moved between the tables with practiced ease, a tray balanced on her hand. More coffee, Mr. Wallace? She asked, tilting the pot toward his half-empty cup. Don't mind if I do, he said, his voice gruff, but his eyes twinkling. And you've done it, Cynthia. This place feels just like home. Thank you, she replied, her smile reaching her eyes. As she turned to another table, she caught sight of Justin darting between chairs, carefully delivering plates of steaming stew. His laughter bubbled up as Mrs. Cartwright ruffled his hair. In the kitchen, Nathan worked with quiet precision, his hands moving swiftly as he garnished a plate with freshly chopped herbs. The air was filled with the rich aroma of roasted vegetables and baking bread. He glanced toward the dining area, catching a glimpse of Cynthia weaving through the tables. A flicker of pride crossed his face before he turned back to the stove. By the second week, the Hearthstone was bustling with a mix of locals and tourists. Word had spread quickly about the cozy tavern tucked away in the woods. Cynthia found herself busier than she'd ever imagined, but the work was satisfying. She no longer moved with the hesitancy of someone looking over her shoulder. Each order taken, each guest greeted, was another step away from the life she'd left behind. It wasn't always easy. There were nights when the exhaustion from the day's work wasn't enough to keep the nightmares at bay. In her dreams, Dylan loomed large, his face twisted with anger, his voice echoing with accusations. She would wake, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts, only to find the darkness of the cabin surrounding her. One such night, she stumbled into the kitchen, clutching a mug of tea and trying to steady her trembling hands. She hadn't expected to find Nathan there, sitting at the table with a book open in front of him. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, without looking up, his tone calm. She shook her head, sliding into the chair across from him. "Bad dream," she admitted after a pause. Nathan closed the book, leaning back slightly. "About him?" Cynthia nodded, her hands tightening around the mug. "You're safe here. It's been a year," he said softly, his voice carrying the quiet conviction of someone who meant every word. She met his eyes, the tension in her chest easing slightly. "Thank you," she said, the words simple but heavy with meaning. He didn't press her further, and they sat in companionable silence, the soft crackle of the fire in the next room filling the space between them. As the weeks turned into months, the hearthstone became more than just a business. It became a home. Cynthia marveled at how far she had come, from the woman who had fled into the snow that Christmas night to the confident manager who now welcomed guests with a smile. Justin thrived in the new environment. He had his own small apron, which he wore proudly as he helped serve drinks or cleaned tables. The guests adored him, and his cheerful presence became as much a part of the hearthstone's charm as the food or the warmth of the fire. Nathan, too, seemed to find his footing. In the kitchen, he excelled, his movements fluid and assured. Yet outside of it, there were moments when he hesitated, as if questioning his place in this newfound family. One evening, after the last guests had left, Cynthia found him sitting on the porch, staring out at the snow-covered woods. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, stepping outside and pulling her coat tighter around her. Nathan didn't look at her, his gaze fixed on the trees. "Do you ever wonder if this is real?" he asked. Cynthia frowned. "What do you mean?" He exhaled, his breath visible in the cold air. "Sometimes I think I'm here because it reminds me of her, of what we had." Cynthia's chest tightened. She sank onto the step beside him, the silence stretching between them. "And now?" she asked gently. Nathan finally turned to her, his eyes searching hers. "Now, I'm not so sure, but I know this. What we've built here, it feels right." She nodded, the unspoken understanding passing between them. As the hearthstone flourished, the legacy of the past also flourished. It was small things at first, a figure glimpsed through a shop window, the sound of a familiar voice in town. Cynthia dismissed them as paranoia, the ghosts of old fears. But one evening, as she closed the inn's doors, locking them against the cold night, she felt a prickle at the back of her neck. Across the snowy road, a figure lingered in the shadows, watching, her breath caught, her hand tightening on the key. Dylan. He stepped back into the dark before she could be sure, but the unease lingered, curling around her like the frost outside. Inside, the warmth of the hearthstone felt like a fragile barrier against the chill of what was to come. The Hearthstone Inn and Tavern sparkled with Christmas cheer. Garlands of pine adorned the walls, gold-painted pine cones hung in neat rows, and strings of warm lights illuminated every corner. The smell of cinnamon and roasted chestnuts filled the air, blending with the soft hum of a holiday tune playing on the radio. Justin stood on a stool by the tree, carefully hanging a shiny red ornament. Cynthia steadied him with one hand, her other holding a gold star meant for the tree's top. Nathan was busy untangling a string of lights, muttering under his breath as the cord refused to cooperate. "Do we really need all these lights?" Nathan grumbled. Justin grinned. "Yes, we do. The more lights, the better." Cynthia chuckled. "You heard the boss?" she said, gesturing to Justin. Nathan rolled his eyes playfully and went back to the tangled mess. The moment felt perfect, calm, warm, filled with the kind of quiet joy Cynthia had almost forgotten could exist. But as she placed the star on the top branch, a sharp knock at the door shattered the tranquility. Nathan paused, the lights in his hands falling limp. Cynthia froze, her hand lingering on the tree, a chill creeping up her spine. "I'll get it," Nathan said, setting the lights down and heading toward the door. The knock came again, louder this time, almost impatient. Nathan opened the door and there he was, Dylan. He stood in the doorway, snow clinging to his coat and boots, his eyes scanning the room before landing on Cynthia. The world seemed to pause for a moment. "What the hell is this?" Dylan said, his voice low but edged with venom. His eyes flicked to the decorated tree, then to Justin, who had shrunk behind Cynthia, clutching her skirt. "Dylan," Cynthia managed, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" Dylan stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, the cold air following him. "What am I doing here? What are you doing here? Running off to play house with some stranger?" He gestured toward Nathan, who now stood firmly between Dylan and the rest of the room. "Get out," Nathan said, his tone calm but unyielding. Dylan ignored him, his attention fixed on Cynthia. "You think you can just take my son and disappear, like I wouldn't find you?" "I didn't take him," Cynthia said, her voice steadying despite the fear bubbling inside her. "You threw us out, Dylan. You left us with nothing." Dylan's face twisted in anger. "Don't act like a saint. You're no better than me. Running off with another man, teaching Justin God knows what. He's going to end up just like you, a liar and a failure." "Enough," Nathan said, stepping closer. "You've made your point. Now leave." Dylan's glare shifted to Nathan, sizing him up. "Who the hell do you think you are? This isn't your family. You're just some lonely idiot playing daddy." Nathan's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. "You need to leave," he repeated. Justin whimpered, and Cynthia crouched down, pulling him close. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered, though her heart was pounding. Dylan took another step forward, his hands balling into fists. "You think you can take what's mine?" he snarled at Nathan. "I'm not leaving without them." "You don't own them," Nathan said, his voice steady but low. "And you're not taking them anywhere." The tension broke like a tense wire. Dylan lunged, swinging at Nathan with a force fueled by rage. Nathan dodged the first blow, but caught the second, stumbling back into the table. "Stop it!" Cynthia screamed, clutching Justin as tightly as she could. Nathan recovered quickly, pushing Dylan back. But the fight was uneven. Dylan was wild, his aggression unchecked, while Nathan tried to keep his movements measured. The scuffle tipped over chairs and sent a stack of plates crashing to the floor. In the chaos, Nathan managed to shove Dylan toward the door, but not before Dylan landed a hard punch to his side. Nathan crumpled slightly, gripping his ribs as Dylan staggered outside. The sound of sirens cut through the night, flashing red and blue lights, painting the snow. Someone, perhaps a neighbor, had called the police. Dylan's shouts turned into curses as two officers approached, pulling him away from the doorway. "She's mine," he yelled, his voice carrying through the stillness. "You'll regret this, Cynthia." Cynthia watched, her arms still around Justin, as Dylan was handcuffed and escorted to the waiting patrol car. Inside, the aftermath was quieter, but no less jarring. Nathan sat on the couch, wincing as he pressed a cloth to the cut on his forehead. Cynthia stood nearby, her hands shaking as she tried to clean up the mess. "You should go to the hospital," she said, her voice thick with worry. "I'm fine," Nathan replied, though his face was pale. "You're not fine," she said firmly, crouching in front of him. "Please, for me, for Justin." Nathan sighed, the fight leaving his shoulders. "All right," he said softly. Hours later, Cynthia sat in the hospital waiting room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Justin leaned against her, asleep, but clutching her hand. The events of the night replayed in her mind, Dylan's words echoing like a distant storm. Nathan would recover. The injuries weren't as bad as they had first seemed, but the shadow Dylan had cast over their lives felt harder to dispel. As she looked down at Justin's peaceful face, Cynthia made a silent promise. She had fought too hard to build this life for them, and she wasn't going to let Dylan take it away. The snow outside the hospital fell in slow, measured flakes, muffling the sounds of the world beyond its cold, sterile walls. Inside Nathan's room, the only light came from a dim lamp above the bed, casting soft shadows across the walls. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was the only sound, a steady reminder of his fragile state. Cynthia sat in the chair beside him, her hands clasped tightly together, her gaze fixed on his face. Nathan looked pale, his skin drawn tight over his sharp features, but his breathing was even, and the color was slowly returning to his cheeks. Justin had fallen asleep on a small cot pushed into the corner of the room, his stuffed bear tucked under his arm. Cynthia's eyes flicked toward her son, her heart swelling with both relief and exhaustion. For all the chaos of the night, Justin had been brave, holding onto her hand, even as his small body trembled with fear. Nathan stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He blinked at the ceiling for a moment, before turning his head toward Cynthia. "You're still here," he said, his voice rough but steady. "Where else would I be?" she replied softly, leaning forward. Nathan tried to push himself up, wincing as the movement sent a sharp pain through his ribs. Cynthia was at his side in an instant, her hand on his shoulder to steady him. "Don't," she said firmly. "You need to rest." He let out a low chuckle, though it ended in a grimace. "You're bossy." "Someone has to be," she shot back, her lips curving into a faint smile. For a moment they just looked at each other. The weight of everything unsaid hung in the air, pressing down on them both. Cynthia broke the silence first. "You shouldn't have done that," she said quietly, her voice tinged with both gratitude and worry. "You didn't have to put yourself in danger like that." Nathan's brow furrowed. "What was I supposed to do? Let him take you? Take Justin?" "No, that wasn't an option." Cynthia's throat tightened, the memory of Dylan's rage flashing through her mind. "He could have killed you," she whispered. "But he didn't," Nathan said, his voice softening. "And he won't. Not while I'm around." Her breath hitched, and she looked away, her hands twisting together. "I don't know how to keep doing this," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "Every time I think I'm safe, that Justin is safe, something happens to remind me how fragile it all is." Nathan reached out, his hand covering hers. The warmth of his touch was steadying, grounding. "You're not alone in this, Cynthia," he said, his voice firm despite the fatigue in his eyes. "You don't have to do it all by yourself anymore." She turned back to him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Why?" she asked, the word trembling on her lips. "Why do you care so much?" Nathan hesitated, his gaze searching hers. "Because," he began slowly, "I've spent so long running from everything. My grief, my past, myself. But you—" He paused, his voice growing softer. "You remind me what it's like to care again, to fight for something that matters." Cynthia's breath caught. The sincerity in his words cut through her fear, her doubt. "I didn't think I could ever trust someone again," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Not after Dylan. Not after everything he took from me." "You don't have to trust me right away," Nathan said gently. "But I'll be here, as long as you'll have me." Her tears spilled over then, sliding silently down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. "I've been so afraid," she confessed. "Afraid of what he'd do. Afraid of what I might lose if I tried to start over. But you've shown me that maybe it's possible. To start over, I mean." Nathan's grip on her hand tightened, his thumb brushing against her knuckles. "You're stronger than you think, Cynthia. You've built something beautiful here. You've built a home. Don't let him take that away from you." She nodded, her chest tightening with a mix of emotions she couldn't name. "I won't," she said softly. "Not again." Nathan smiled faintly, his exhaustion evident, but his resolve unwavering. "Good." As the room fell quiet again, Cynthia leaned back in her chair, her hand still in Nathan's. For the first time since Dylan had reappeared, she felt a glimmer of hope. The storm outside the hospital continued, but inside, the warmth between them grew. It wasn't grand or sweeping, but it was real, a quiet promise of something better, something worth fighting for. For Cynthia, that was enough. The Hearthstone Inn and Tavern, nestled beneath snow-laden pines, had always exuded a warmth that drew people in. But after the events with Dylan and Nathan's recovery, its purpose began to shift into something even more profound. It started quietly. Cynthia, sitting by the fire late one evening, had been reflecting on her journey. The fear she'd carried from her life with Dylan had begun to loosen its grip, but the scars it left remained. She thought of all the women who might be trapped in similar circumstances, too afraid or too alone to find a way out. The idea came almost naturally. A sanctuary, a place where women in need could find not only safety, but a chance to rebuild. The first woman arrived 2 weeks later. Sarah, a young mother with a toddler on her hip and bruises that spoke of a long history of suffering, had been directed to the Hearthstone by a mutual friend of Mrs. Cartwright. Cynthia welcomed her in with open arms, offering her the warmth of the fire and a bed upstairs. Justin watched quietly from the kitchen doorway as Nathan prepared soup for their new guest. When Sarah's toddler began to cry, Justin stepped forward hesitantly, holding out his own stuffed bear. "He can borrow it if he wants," Justin offered, his voice soft but steady. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she took the bear, clutching it to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Cynthia knelt beside Justin later that night, tucking him into bed. "That was very kind of you," she said, brushing his hair back. Justin shrugged, his expression thoughtful. "She looked like she needed it more than me." Cynthia kissed his forehead, her heart swelling with pride. Word spread, and soon the Hearthstone became a refuge. Cynthia didn't advertise or announce its new role, but the women who came found their way through whispers, through neighbors, through people who cared. Each one brought their own pain, their own stories of survival. Nathan had quietly transformed the upstairs storage rooms into simple but comfortable spaces, complete with warm quilts and sturdy furniture. "It's not fancy," he'd said one evening as they stood in the doorway of one of the rooms, "but it'll keep them safe." Cynthia turned to him, her voice thick with gratitude. "It's perfect." Nathan dismissed the gratitude, yet the subtle smile on his face conveyed a powerful message. The Hearthstone's dual role as a tavern and a sanctuary flourished. The women who came often helped with the inn, finding solace in the rhythm of daily tasks. Cynthia shared her story when it felt right, not to relive her pain, but to show that it was possible to heal, to find strength again. One snowy afternoon, she sat at the kitchen table with Marisol, a woman who had fled from a controlling partner. Marisol's hands trembled as she gripped her teacup, and her voice remained barely audible. Marisol confessed, "I don't know how to start over." Cynthia reached across the table, her hand resting gently over Marisol's. "Neither did I," she said softly. "But you don't have to do it all at once. Just one step at a time. And you don't have to do it alone." Marisol nodded, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in months, she smiled. Justin, now the unofficial ambassador of Hearthstone, thrived in the new environment. He took to his role with a seriousness that belied his years, proudly showing the other children around, offering them small treasures he found in the woods, or helping them with chores. One evening, as Justin sat at the counter drawing, Nathan leaned over to inspect his work. "What's this?" he asked, pointing to a picture of a house surrounded by smiling stick figures. "It's the Hearthstone," Justin said simply. "That's you, and Mom, and me, and everyone else who comes here." Nathan's chest tightened, the simple drawing striking a chord he hadn't expected. "You're a good kid, Justin," he said, his voice rough. Justin grinned up at him. "I know." Cynthia too found herself flourishing. The woman she'd once been, hesitant, fearful, uncertain, was fading into memory. In her place stood someone confident, someone who believed in what she was building. Late one night, as she and Nathan stood on the porch, watching the snow fall, she spoke softly. "I never imagined this," she admitted. "That we'd be here. That this place would mean so much to so many people." Nathan glanced at her, his expression unreadable, but warm. "You made it happen," he said. "You took what you'd been through and turned it into something good." She looked at him, her heart full. "We made it happen." Nathan nodded, his gaze lingering on hers. The quiet between them was comfortable, filled with the unspoken connection they'd built over months of shared work and shared hope. The Hearthstone Inn and Tavern glowed warmly against the winter night, its lights spilling through the frosted windows and onto the blanket of snow that surrounded it. Inside, the air was filled with the sounds of celebration. Laughter, clinking glasses, and the gentle hum of a guitar being played by one of the guests. It was New Year's Eve, and the inn was brimming with life. Another year has passed since Nathan confessed his love to Cynthia. Cynthia stood in the corner of the room, cradling 2-month-old Lucy in her arms. The baby stirred slightly, letting out a small whimper before settling against her mother's chest. Cynthia rocked her gently, her eyes scanning the room. Justin sat cross-legged on the floor near the fireplace, proudly explaining the rules of his favorite card game to a group of children. His laughter rang out, his voice carrying a maturity beyond his years, but his boyish joy was unmistakable. Nathan emerged from the kitchen, carrying a tray of hot chocolate topped with whipped cream and sprinkles. He caught Cynthia's eye and smiled, a quiet, knowing look that made her heart feel lighter. "For the kids," he said, as he passed the tray to Mrs. Cartwright, who was helping serve the holiday treats. "And for the adults?" Cynthia teased, shifting Lucy slightly in her arms. Nathan leaned closer, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Mulled wine's on the way. You're welcome." She laughed softly, the sound carrying a warmth that matched the inn's cozy glow. The transformation over the past year had been remarkable. What had once been a humble cabin was now a sanctuary, not just for them, but for so many others. Women and children who had found their way to the Hearthstone during their most desperate moments now filled the space with joy, laughter, and hope. Marisol, one of their earliest guests, was helping to set the long wooden tables with plates of freshly baked bread and roasted vegetables. She caught Cynthia's eye and gave a small, grateful smile. Marisol's journey had been difficult, but here she was, a woman rebuilding her life, her confidence growing day by day. Cynthia shifted her gaze back to Lucy, brushing a thumb gently over her soft cheek. "It's incredible, isn't it?" Nathan had come to stand beside her, his hands shoved into his pockets. "What is?" She nodded toward the room. "This. Them. Us. A year ago, I was terrified to hope for anything. Now, it feels like this is what life was always meant to be." Nathan didn't respond immediately, but his hand came to rest on her back, a gesture as steady as he had been throughout the past year. "You made this place more than an inn, Cynthia. You made it a home." Cynthia looked at him, her chest tightening. "We made it a home," she corrected softly. Nathan met her gaze, his expression gentle. "Fair enough." As midnight approached, the guests gathered around the large window that faced the snow-covered woods. Justin, his excitement palpable, ran to Nathan, tugging at his hand. "Hurry. You're going to miss it," Justin exclaimed, his cheeks flushed with anticipation. Nathan let himself be pulled to the window, and Cynthia followed, settling into a chair near the corner, with Lucy still cradled in her arms. She watched as Justin stood between Nathan and Marisol's young son, their faces pressed to the glass, their voices bubbling with delight. 10 minutes to midnight," Mrs. Cartwright announced, raising her glass of cider. Cheers erupted, and the group settled into a mix of chatter and anticipation. Nathan returned to Cynthia's side, kneeling beside her chair. "Everything okay?" he asked, glancing at Lucy. "She's perfect," Cynthia said, her voice full of awe. Nathan looked up at her, his eyes softening. "You're perfect too." Cynthia felt her cheeks warm, but before she could reply, Justin's voice rang out. "It's starting!" The first fireworks streaked across the sky, a brilliant cascade of gold and red that reflected off the snowy ground. The crowd at the window let out gasps of delight as more bursts followed. Green, blue, and silver, painting the dark sky in dazzling colors. Cynthia stood, joining the others at the window with Lucy in her arms. Justin pressed close to her side, his eyes wide with wonder. Nathan stood behind her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. As the final fireworks lit up the night, casting the hearthstone in a warm, radiant glow, Cynthia glanced around the room. The women who had found refuge here were smiling, their faces lit with hope. The children were laughing, their voices carrying the unbridled joy of new beginnings. Nathan leaned down, his voice low in her ear. "What are you wishing for?" Cynthia turned to him, her heart full. "I don't need to wish for anything," she said softly. "Everything I've ever hoped for is right here." Nathan smiled, his hand tightening on her shoulder. As the last fireworks faded, leaving the sky glittering with stars, the Hearthstone Inn and Tavern stood as a beacon of warmth and safety, a reminder that even in the coldest winters, hope and love could light the way. In that moment, surrounded by her family and the community they had built, Cynthia knew that this was more than a new year. It was a new beginning. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. Share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values, yet entertaining. See you there.